You're about to watch two programs from the BBC's world-famous Natural History Unit. Squirrel On My Shoulder and Brockside, just one of the wildlife specials priced at £9.99 each. Also available, aliens from inner space, animals that could come from another world but quietly inhabit our own in the depths of the oceans, now captured on BBC Video in all their colourful beauty. And on the same cassette, just when you thought it was safe to go back into the water, the fastest claw in the West tells the story of the killer shrimps.
Many strange creatures haunt the depths of the sea, but few have such an unexpected talent as the mantis shrimp.
Also in the series of wildlife specials, On the Tracks of the Wild Otter, a film about the lives of these very rare and beautiful animals in their home on the Shetland Islands, captured for BBC Video by top cameraman Hugh Miles. And on the same £9.99 video, The Mouse's Tale, the story of the little rodents that share our homes and our lives. Also on BBC Video, Bird Brain of Britain, a light-hearted search for the cleverest of our feathered friends. Simon King devises some fiendish feats for the wildlife to work out, and on the same cassette, The Flying Gourmet's Guide.
The Flying Gourmet's Guide's most exclusive restaurant. In the gardens of Buckingham Palace, a bird table by royal appointment to Her Majesty. Open only to a few select guests, this restaurant is set in landscaped English parkland with palatial vistas.
This is a story about one very special grey squirrel. Until recently, all grey squirrels have had a price on their heads, or more accurately, their tails. Introduced from America 100 years ago, they are to some among the most unwelcome of our wild animals. To the forester, there's only one good grey squirrel, and that's a dead one. Plantations of young trees are particularly vulnerable to squirrel damage. In winter, the leafless trees give a clear shot as the animals run for their lives. The safest nests are those hidden deep inside hollow trees. The security of an old oak is a preferred place for pregnant females to build a dray, where in February and March they give birth to their babies. The newborn young, often 2 or 3 in a litter, lie buried in a cradle of dry grass and twigs. Blind and helpless, they're totally dependent on the mother for food and protection. It's in such a place as this, late one February, that our particular squirrel came into the world, here in the ancient Witchwood Forest of Oxford. It had been one of those exceptional seasons when most squirrels in Britain had failed to breed, probably due to the unusual weather of the 2 previous years. Oak woods are ideal habitats for the grey squirrel, and with his retriever, Ben, filmmaker John Paling was on the lookout for signs of squirrel families. It was the retriever's alert senses that first attracted his attention to the base of this elderly oak.
Hang on, Ben. What's that? Come out. Come on. Get away. What's that then? Oh, poor thing.
Ben had found a young male squirrel whose mother had either been shot or she had abandoned it. Either way, the youngster had fallen from its dray and would soon starve to death without its mother.
Its eyes were still closed, and I estimated it was about 2.5 weeks old. Clammy and cold, it had just started growing its fur. Clearly it needed warmth, and on the spur of the moment, I offered my glove as temporary protection.
Come on then, babe.
As the law stands, no grey squirrel may be kept in captivity without a special license. I already had permission to study the squirrel's breeding season, but I'd no idea what I'd be letting myself in for. Within hours, my kitchen had become an emergency feeding centre. With sterilised cow's milk and a pipette at the ready, I gently tried to feed this pathetic individual. If I was going to be successful, I would have to persuade him to accept food every 4 hours, day and night, for a month or so, and to keep him warm and clean to avoid infection. Come on, come on. Come on. I could see it wasn't going to work. I couldn't get him to take milk from the unyielding tube. In desperation, anything seemed worth trying, even the impossible. A cat is not normally a sightless alien alongside her recently born kittens. Distracting the cat's attention, I tried giving the young squirrel a start in the right direction, staying close at hand, ready to jump to the rescue if the cat decided to turn on the uninvited guest. Incredibly, Beauty seemed to sense nothing unusual, and the squirrel appeared to be welcomed as a member of the family. Persuading the newcomer to take food was now an urgent priority. Could I persuade him to suckle milk from his foster mother? Richer than cow's milk, the natural milk of a cat is very similar to a mother squirrel's. Very gently, I eased him into position. Come back, kitten. Come on, Beauty. Come on, come on. Uh-huh. Get back. Come on, squirrel. Buried beneath a pile of kittens, a flick of the squirrel's tail announced that he'd got the idea. Something of a minor miracle that we'd managed to establish such an unusual relationship. We marked this unique occasion by naming our orphan Sammy Squitten.
Within 2 weeks, all the animals had opened their eyes, and for kittens and squirrel, Beauty was indisputably mother of all. Differences in behaviour were beginning to be well marked. Mother squirrels don't have the rough preening tongue of a cat, and the baby squirrel spent long periods scratching itself to keep its fur well groomed. It was now mid-April in Witchwood Forest. Sammy's wild cousins would now be stretching their long legs in the confines of their drays, still feeding on mother's milk, waiting for the full rewards of spring when they would be weaned onto the succulent tree buds. Inside the centrally heated surroundings of his dray, Sammy was already the centre of attraction in the cat basket. Much sought after as a playmate, he did his best to lie low. It was some time before he realized that attack was the best means of defense. With legs becoming stronger, they began to investigate beyond the confines of the basket. The kitchen floor became a new world for exploration. The young squirrel was able to hop, but the drooping tail shows how much more his muscles had to develop before he could lift his brush with true squirrel flourish. Differences in behavior between kittens and squirrel were now as pronounced as they were unexpected. Lapping milk presents no problem to a kitten. To Sammy, it was a most complicated affair. Under Mother's watchful eye, he seemed to sense the food well enough, but he was not equipped to lap liquids, cat fashion. Gnawing will be his natural style. The bowl was not a juicy branch that could be stripped for the nourishment in the sap. The kittens began to practice the capture-kill behavior of the carnivore. It's totally alien to the mainly vegetarian squirrel, but Sammy's tail became an attractive target for play. Sammy's superior speed and agility gave him advantages in getting out of the kitten's way, only to be even more quickly in the way of John Paling.
Come on. Get down. You stay down there. In his zest for adventure, anything seemed fair game, and nothing escaped his attention. I began to reap the reward suffered by all who, for whatever reason, offer domestic security to a wild creature. Have this. Come. If a piece of apple failed to lure him within grasp, a spell of shadow wrestling might finally succeed in putting him in his place. Oh, come on. You stay there. Now Sammy began to show he was very much a squirrel. Despite Beauty's attempts to teach him otherwise, the litter tray became an ideal place to bury nuts, expertly performed with totally untaught technique. The mother cat had already given up trying to teach him what the litter tray was really for.
As Sammy began to feed on solids as well as Beauty's milk, the time was now approaching for John Paling to make a decision about Sammy's future. As soon as he judged that the moment was right, John Paling had always planned to release the orphan back into the wild. So Sammy was given a portable home, which would eventually be taken out and fastened high on a tree in the garden. The fact that Sammy could bite was perhaps no bad thing. He was going to have to be tough to stand up to the harsh world outside.
You stay put and show you home.
With a new home came a new diet. Although the social mix of cats and squirrel remained as amicable as ever, the two species preferred to go their own way at meal times. Rejected by the kittens, Sammy's dish of leaves and buds was one way of getting him accustomed to the food which squirrels would now be eating in the wild.
As part of the planned build-up to his release, I began taking Sammy into the garden to select and pick his own food. I had to keep a close eye on him to prevent any premature dash for freedom. Clearly, he had a normal young squirrel's taste for vegetation. Unfortunately, this taste had no limits. It applied equally to all vegetation, both outside and inside the house. In circumstances like this, all I could do was to give the animal its head, and accept that even the annihilation of any flower arrangement was perhaps the price one has to pay for interfering with the process of nature. Even in domestic security, Sammy's life sometimes swung precariously on a knife edge. He found plastic insulation of electric wiring good to chew, and escaped electrocution only by the narrowest margin. He could strip wire clean in seconds. Here's the most remarkable demonstration of natural squirrel behavior: nest making. Totally untaught by the cats or myself, Sammy demonstrates a new use for a box of tissues and a food mixer.
Now almost fully grown, the time had come for Sammy to taste the freedom of the outside world. John had done his best to weaken the squirrel's association with people and prepared food, and he was now agile and uncontrollable. After obtaining the necessary permission, Sammy was confined into his box, stocked with peanuts, and carried into the garden. There's always considerable risk in releasing a semi-tame animal into the wild. He had been raised in very unusual surroundings, without the opportunity to learn anything from his natural squirrel mother. But Sammy had learnt to be tough and to look after himself in the rough and tumble of Beauty's family. It was now July the 13th, 3 months since Sammy had been found as a scrawny baby. After much heart-searching, John decided it best to give him his freedom. The alternative was permanent captivity. Sammy soon emerged with a peanut and set out exploring his new environment. He quickly found some of the peanuts put out for the birds and wild squirrels. For the first time, he met one of the permanent wild residents in the garden and began to get involved in squirrel disputes, which occur in midsummer as the youngsters leave the nest to join the adult population. In these brief skirmishes, it was impossible for John Paling to positively identify Sammy. It became increasingly evident that the young squirrel was becoming absorbed into the wildlife of Witchwood with the other youngsters searching for new territory. Sycamore and beech would be their favourite targets. Squirrels tear off the bark and chew into the sapwood underneath. Prize plantations can be severely damaged in this way. Sammy disappeared within 3 days of his release, perhaps into the very plantations where, understandably, the foresters would attempt to shoot him out. Or possibly he had been unsuccessful in negotiating one of the major hazards facing so many squirrels as they explore new ground. As autumn approached, John was told that a baby squirrel, just like Sammy, had been killed by a neighbour's cat. His box was never occupied again. With only the slimmest chance that Sammy would find his niche and live through the winter, it was inevitable that John should feel pangs of regret, a guilty conscience that perhaps he had let Sammy down, betrayed the confidence that he and Beauty had tried to give the orphan.
Although I felt sure that Sammy had gone, I continued to keep an eye on the other wild squirrels that came regularly to the nuts I put out. But no Sammy. Squirrels don't truly hibernate for long periods. Apart from short spells to feed, they conserve energy by staying in their drays until January, when the males start to court the females. One of the animals learnt to tightrope along the clothesline on his way to the bird feeder. But again, it wasn't Sammy.
On January the 20th, after the long, cold, hard winter, an adult squirrel appeared on John's window ledge.
Who are you then? There was something about this squirrel that reminded me immediately of Sammy. That small mark on his forehead that came long ago from one of the kitten's paws. I could hardly believe my eyes. 6 months and 10 days since I'd last seen him. Sammy had returned.
And now, to mark his return from the wild, this rather special grey squirrel gave John a permanent souvenir.
Oh! You wretched thing!
most people think of a badger, they imagine a shy, solitary animal, living in the countryside and keeping itself very much to itself. But as we'll see in this film, some badgers live in the towns. They're very sociable beasts, and they're anything but shy.
Pretty boy. Bill. Oh, what a nice big fat boy. You're getting ready for the winter, aren't you? Eh? And Sophie, I want you to go and fetch the babies in now, like your good little badgers. Right? You're an overgrown ferret. I feed these badgers every night, and I have done so for several years now. I talk to them, they're quite friendly with me. Tell them lots of little secrets, which they don't blab on to other people. Very useful having badgers to tell secrets to.
Of the many badgers that are fed regularly by people, this group Fay Burton watches in Staffordshire is exceptional. They have such a complete trust in her that when she whistles, they come out of their set, even in broad daylight. In Wrexham, Mr. Williams' relationship with town badgers started on his doorstep.
We happened to be watching television and we looked out the window and there was a badger on the scene. And then we started feeding them, didn't we? Mm. Well, they got a bit greedy then. They seemed to come to the back door and started knocking at the back door, didn't they? This blonde badger turned up on the scene. And, you know, with it being a different colour from the rest, I thought, well, I couldn't believe our eyes at first.
This pale animal is not an albino, but an erythristic badger. It's a rare colour variety in which the black markings have been replaced by red. More than one pale badger showed up at the Williams house. This one has been visiting for 11 years. That's just about as old as a wild badger gets, and proves that being pale is no disadvantage to survival. In towns, badgers still dig large underground networks of holes. These sets may be decades, even centuries old, and the older they are, the bigger they get. But unlike foxes, which moved into the towns, badger sets were here long before bricks and mortar were in sight. For it's bricks and mortar that have spelt doom for many a badger's home. Their traditional sets have been slowly encircled by development, leaving the animals isolated, stranded in a sea of houses. And for these badgers, there is no escape. This set near Reading was the subject of a vigorous campaign fought between developers and the local residents led by Mrs. Shirley Davis.
I started to get rather angry, and I made up my mind that there was absolutely no way that I was going to let these badgers die. They came every evening to see me. I couldn't betray them. There is no way I could have betrayed those badgers and allowed them to die.
Eventually, Shirley Davis and the other protesters forced the developers into a solution. The badger set would be totally enclosed on all sides by a fence. A flap in the metal door would be the badger's way out. Leading from the enclosure, a narrow, fenced alleyway would provide a secure path for the badgers to new foraging grounds. But despite this minor triumph, Shirley feels it's necessary to carry water and bedding to the set every day, until, she hopes, the badgers get used to being surrounded by a housing estate.
What really worries me is the fact that now they are surrounded completely by the houses. If the people in those houses aren't sympathetic towards badgers, then the badgers will have no foraging whatsoever. If they get into their gardens, the people aren't going to be sympathetic.
Shirley has good reason to be worried. The future for these badgers looks pretty grim.
But here is one success story. A pocket of woodland surrounded by the town and housing developments, and in it, one of the largest known groups of badgers in Britain. There must be at least 30 badgers here, and I've been filming them on and off for the past year or so. One man, though, has spent the past 30 years studying these animals intensively, and that's local resident Don Hunford. Don can identify these badgers as individuals. He recognizes them by their marks, by their size, their shape, sometimes just their personalities.
By recognizing and naming each animal, Don has been able to gather a mass of information about the behavior of his badgers. They, and indeed all badgers, live in family groups, usually several generations in the same set. They spend the first part of each evening together. During this time, they play, groom, and reinforce the family bond by scent marking each other. A musky smell is produced by a gland at the base of the tail, and every group has its own unique odour. These musking sessions often involve lots of animals. Relationships within the group are also made stronger by the animals regularly grooming each other. This may also help reduce the numbers of fleas and lice. There's often sexual activity around the set from spring right through to late summer, but successful matings usually take place between dominant animals. Each badger, in fact, has a well-defined social status within the group. This is established and maintained by bouts of play fighting. It may look vicious, but this is no more than rough play between a youngster and an adult. This island of woodland in the middle of urban Essex belongs to Don Hunford. It's safe from the encroaching tide of development, for now at least. Elsewhere, the summer rain brings a tasty badger snack to the surface. Badgers are true omnivores, eating everything from worms and insect larvae to windfall plums. Badgers can climb trees, but this animal, shinning 5 meters up a vertical trunk to reach a woodland bird table, is remarkable. The only way down is a sort of controlled slide. flower bulbs in greenhouses, carrots in vegetable patches, the badgers quietly exploit the town's many food sources. But not without some antagonism from other residents.
Oh dear, look, those wretched badgers have been at my carrots again. What point is there in me buying seed and working hard to try to grow some food for the winter, and then the badgers come and destroy the lot? They even dig up my tulip bulbs. They've had my strawberries for the second year running. It's really disheartening. I've erected barbed wire all around the edge of the garden. I've done the best I can to keep them out. In parts of the garden, along the hedge, I've got netting wire, but it's absolutely hopeless. They still come in. They're ruining and destroying everything, and I'd like to shoot the lot of them.
Undoubtedly, the town badger can cause damage, but it's not deliberate vandalism. This fence was built by a householder across a badger's regular pathway. It simply used its great strength to drive through. And the badger's strength is useful for getting to another source of food. The householder recognizes the culprit, but how many others blame foxes who, in reality, wouldn't be able to pull a full dustbin over? The dustbin contents represent a useful supplement to the badger's diet, especially in winter. Snow lies thick around the Essex set, where earlier I'd filmed Don Huntford's badgers at play. It's a common belief that badgers hibernate. In fact, they're active throughout the cold weather. But because food is scarce, they live off their ample fat reserves laid down in the autumn. Now, towards the end of winter, deep below ground, the newborn cubs have yet to open their eyes. The cubs stay below ground until they're 12 weeks old. They grow very quickly, and soon they're difficult to tell apart from the adults. But they can still be recognized by their powder-puffed tails. Bangor, Northern Ireland, and an unusual encounter between town badgers and local resident Mr. Barclay. It's remarkable that these badgers are coming out in broad daylight, but the fact that they regularly leave the set to feed in the middle of suburbia whilst it's still light is extremely rare. Although most town badgers live in ancient sets, sometimes they build new ones in most unlikely places, under roads, sheds, summer houses, even under our own houses in the cellar or in the foundations. In this disused classroom at a school in Bristol, a small group of badgers arrived 4 years ago, and they established a set just a few inches beneath me, under these floorboards. Down here, it's warm, dry and secure. Because it's dark, they'll come up and play throughout the day, but like all badgers, it's not until nightfall that they become most active. Despite all their security, they were extremely nervous as they emerged, the most difficult group of badgers I had to film. During their nightly wanderings from garden to garden, badgers frequently stop to mark their territories. They do this by depositing dung and urine in shallow pits. The latrines act as a smelly warning for strange badgers to keep out. They keep to regular pathways which crisscross many gardens. Even though their route is well defined, their movements seem quite haphazard. Over one 10-minute period, we recorded all this activity.
This is a badger gate I designed for my own garden. It's entirely rabbit-proof because I put a restrictor on here. A badger with his strength can easily push through that, but a rabbit can't. And it's been absolutely foolproof, and I've never had any rabbits through there yet. Badgers, no problem.
In North Essex, Don Bradnam cleverly made the most of the badgers that passed through his garden.
I've been fascinated with badgers for over 50 years, and I watched them at all hours. And when we came here 23 years ago, I decided that's enough of badger watching, going out in the woods and all that sort of thing in the dark and cold. And I thought they can come to me now. So I dug an artificial set out in the garden, and I got a two-way switch in the set entrance, which I've connected by a cable, right across to this recorder here. This little gadget makes pinpoint punctures above the line when they go into the set, below the line when they come out.
Don has mastered the art of comfortable badger watching. He sits in an easy chair and waits for the badgers to arrive. They enter the artificial set and proceed along a complex system of tunnels to the feeding chamber, where Don can also watch them. The badgers probably believe they're below ground, whereas, in fact, the chamber is raised 3 feet up for easy viewing. Here, literally only inches away, Don can observe them eating and sleeping, blissfully unaware of any human presence. Unwittingly or otherwise, man is still responsible for the majority of badger deaths. When the Hastings to Tunbridge Railway was electrified in 1986, at least 100 badgers were killed in one fortnight. Most people only see a badger lying dead on the road, the ultimate fate for most urban badgers. But man has done his bit to come up with solutions. Gaps have now been put into some electrified lines, especially for badgers. On the roads, badger tunnels have been built under motorways or, as here, slung beneath a footbridge over a major road. On side roads, these reflectors are meant to dazzle badgers and stop them crossing, but it's doubtful if any of these measures make a difference to the number of badger deaths. Back in Essex, roads also represent a hazard for the numerous badgers at Don Huntford's set. There are probably so many badgers in this group because people have been feeding them. The main set is in those trees behind me. But Don doesn't feed them all through the night. Urban badgers will sometimes cover quite large distances, several kilometres even, in search of food, and these are no exception. They travel all the way down this alley to feed in the gardens of some of these houses, where a meal is prepared for them every night. But to get to these gardens, they have to cross this road. Don's badgers may be wary of traffic, but their road sense is pretty poor. They cross at a gallop and hope for the best. A 100 yards away, Harry Slater has spent the past 1.5 hours preparing the night's food. 1/2 pound of chocolate buttons, over 2 pounds of biscuits, 50 cakes, 5.5 pounds of peanuts, in fact, a total weight of over 15 pounds of food for the badgers every night. Dinner is served. On the patio to begin with, then proceeding by easy stages to the front doorstep, and then the hall. And for those with a more adventurous spirit, there's the television lounge. This process of gradual enticement has been going on at the Slaters for almost 30 years. These are the very same animals I filmed back at their woodland set on the other side of the road. Such unusually large groups of town badgers only survive as long as people, like the Slaters, continue to feed them.
There's a boy. Come on then. You're going to snatch, aren't you? Come on. You're going to snatch. Like, come on. There. Come on, Spike. Come on. Come on. Come on then.
3 wild badgers in the lounge isn't unusual for the Slaters, but on rare occasions they have had up to 16 in the house, 11 or more in the lounge alone. And outside, over 24 have come at any one time to feed on the patio. Deep in the heart of suburban Hastings, an encounter between man and wild animal is about to be recorded for posterity. A trough full of peanuts, a string leading to an elaborate system of pulleys and wires and levers. Enter stage left, the object for all this attention. Now, the theory is that to get to the peanuts, the badger will push the string off the nail with its nose, which will in turn activate the complex mechanism. The photograph is taken, and the inventor of the device, Chas Broadhurst, also manages to make a guest appearance. Although badgers are legally protected, it's still relatively easy to get planning permission to destroy their sets. For it's the animal which enjoys the full sanction of the law, rather than its home. The fact that badgers still survive in our cities is a testament to their tenacity. Wild badgers in the city are not like foxes. They can't adapt easily to change. They have to have their traditional sets, and they have to have large areas to forage in. As man slowly nibbles away at the badger's territory, he's squeezing them out of existence. So it seems inevitable that fewer and fewer people in the 21st century will have the joy of seeing a wild badger in their back garden.